Good morning. I'm Larry Gordon, the Executive Director of Fair Vote Canada, and I'd first briefly like to introduce the three colleagues I'm with here today, who are among the 37 distinguished Canadians who serve on our National Advisory Board. We have John Trent, who's a political scientist at University of Ottawa and is a former Secretary General of the International Political Science Association. We have Nathalie Desrosiers, who's the former President of the Law Commission of Canada and is currently the General Counsel of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and Ed Broadbent, of course, who is the former leader of the federal NDP. Each of us is going to be speaking for about 3 or 4 minutes, and after that, my colleagues will be signing the Declaration of Voters' Rights, and then we'll take questions if there are any follow-up issues. In not too distant future, whether it's weeks or months, we're going to be facing yet another federal election. And before any voters drop any ballots in any ballot boxes across the country, we already know some of the important outcomes of this event. We know that about 7 million of us, of those who still think it's worthwhile to vote in federal elections, about 7 million of us who drop ballots in the ballot box are going to elect no one, are going to send nobody to Parliament. Because we're using a winner-take-all voting system. We also know at this point that the results are going to be very distorted. Some parties are going to get far more seats and far more power than warranted by their popular vote. Other parties are going to get far fewer seats or even no seats at all. And that's not very democratic. We also know at this point that entire regions of the country are going to be dominated by one political party and not reflect the rich diversity of partisan viewpoints that we have in all parts of the country. And we know these things right now before any ballots are cast because Canada is using a voting system that was developed back in the days when people thought the earth was flat. Some people say that we shouldn't be rushing into changing major political institutions or democratic institutions, but at Fair Vote Canada, we think after 1,000 years that it's okay to change and adopt a new voting system that's modern and more democratic and relevant to Canadians living in the 21st century. Not only is our system very ancient, but it clearly subverts the democratic values and principles that Canadians cherish and hold dear. We Canadians believe that every voter should be equal. But in the last election, nearly 1 million people voted for the Green Party and sent nobody to Parliament, while in Alberta alone, fewer people elected 27 Conservative MPs. That's not voter equality and that's not democracy. We Canadians believe that election outcomes should be fair, but our system distorts results. A party gets 40% of the votes, 60% of the seats, and 100% of the power. Recently, there was a lot of coverage of Brian Mulroney's historic landslide win in 1984. There was a lot of attention to what the voting system did, but not to what voters did in that election. Actually, 13 prior prime ministers got more votes than Brian Mulroney had. But what Brian Mulroney did that they didn't was get the benefit of the voting system, giving him a 25% top-up of seats that weren't really deserved. He got 50% of the votes and 75% of the seats. And believe it or not, that's not even the most distorted election outcome that we've ever had. We Canadians also believe in majority rule, even though it's a bit more of a textbook concept than an experience that we've had. Because we are usually governed by phony majority or manufactured majority governments that won a majority of seats but did not capture a majority of votes. This is nuts. It's the 21st century, and we are being hobbled with an ancient, dysfunctional voting system that works against the democratic values that we cherish. And that's what the Declaration of Voters' Rights is about. We're here to launch a project to engage many Canadians across the country to jointly sign this declaration. It's not a petition. It's not a request. It's written, as many political documents throughout history have been, as a declaration and a demand. We believe these rights are ours: voter equality, fair election results, and legitimate majority rule. And through signing this document, we are joining other Canadian voters across the country demanding that these rights be honored now. At this point, I'd like to call up John Trent, who will offer some remarks.
Three weeks ago, a number of the most serious media in the country got together and created panels saying that democracy was in decline in Canada. I'm talking about Maclean's Magazine, CBC, CPAC, all of them said that democracy was going through the floor. Most of the people that participated in these forums agreed. They're the opinion that we were in a free fall for democracy. This opinion that they had is backed up by serious, competent, comparative international political science. These are facts that I'm talking about. They're not just opinions. And the facts looked at two types of electoral systems. One is what we sometimes call the consensus mode of elections, or sometimes proportional representation. The other is what we often call majoritarian, first past the post, or what we have in Canada, winner takes all. They compared these two types of systems. And what did they find? They found, first of all, that the consensus systems win out on almost all scales that are of interest to us. They represent Canadians better. They would represent Canadians. Proportional representation systems would provide for majority governments. They would, in all of these systems around the world, and most, there's hardly any systems that are not proportional, all of them have a much better level of satisfaction of the people, 17% better. They reflect public opinion much better. They also, because of these things, because of this satisfaction with democracy, they also provide for much higher turnout in elections and get many more women elected into parliaments. There are some criticisms of proportional representation. They say there are too many parties, that they're unstable, and so on. All of these criticisms have proven to be incorrect. And so the word efficiency, they also show that these governments in proportional representation are much better at managing the economy and much better at providing for a beneficent environmental setting. So if this is all correct, there is obviously a question. Why don't we have in Canada a system of proportional representation? Now, there's one answer, and it's, as a political scientist, I have to admit it. Change in democracies is very difficult at any time. But in this particular case, the reason that we do not have proportional representation in Canada is very simple. The Liberals and the Conservatives, the two major parties, have a short-sighted and selfish perception of their own interests. And I say they're short-sighted because they're wrong. If there were electoral reform in Canada, these two parties would still be strongest, certainly very strong, in running the country. There's no danger to them except for their backroom boys who seem to think that it might endanger their particular jobs. Thank you very much.